Hi, my name is Cody Waits. I'm the Director for the Office of Skills Development at the Arkansas Department of Commerce. Our agency is a workforce development agency that makes strategic investments in all levels of the Arkansas workforce so that education and earning levels increase. We operate as the state's Office of Apprenticeship, so currently we oversee the 7,000, roughly 300 apprentices active here in the state of Arkansas, the 130 plus active apprenticeship programs. We operate the career and technical education centers around the state, of which there are 30 of those located regionally to serve multiple school districts where students are getting their career and technical education courses. And then lastly, we obviously operate a workforce development grant program where we grant out anywhere from $10 to $15 million on an annual basis to companies, chambers of commerce, economic developers, associations, post-secondary institutions, and others to help further create additional skill sets and investments into our Arkansas workforce. Registered apprenticeship has been around for a long time, but in the United States, it's been around since 1937 with the passage of the Fitzgerald Act, which created the Apprenticeship Act here in the United States. Essentially what it did was it allowed for a training program that combined on-the-job training experience with related technical instruction or classroom learning. At a minimum, you have to have 2,000 hours of on-the-job training and a recommended 144 hours of classroom training to be in compliance with the standards of apprenticeship as recommended by the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Apprenticeship. In Arkansas, as I mentioned previously, we have roughly 7,300 apprentices active. That's up from roughly 3,500 apprentices in 2015 when Governor Hutchinson took office. So we've seen significant growth in registered apprenticeship just over the last 6, 7, 8 years now. And what's interesting is that you've seen that growth not just in what's known as the traditional trades, which you would think of as construction trades, such as electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, roofers, things of that nature. But you've seen significant expansion into other sectors and trades, such as IT, for example. Arkansas ranked second in the country last year in net new IT apprenticeships created. We have seen huge increases in our manufacturing base, looking to how to upskill incumbent workers, new hires through an apprenticeship model. A lot of that geared toward industrial maintenance technicians, CNC operators, things of that nature. And then most recently, we have seen some rapid growth in our healthcare industry with the graduate registered apprenticeship nursing program where employers were having more than 60+% turnover in their recently hired nurses coming out of our in-school. And we've seen that number reduced drastically through a graduate registered apprenticeship nursing model, which is a 1-year almost residency type model, but it combines that on-the-job training with a mentor and the classroom-related instruction that really helps prepare someone for what they're going to find in bedside that maybe they didn't get enough of during their clinical rotation times or things of that nature. And so apprenticeship is a time-tested partnership between employers, and it has to be employer-driven at its core. You can't do apprenticeship unless you have an employer involved in it, and that's the beauty of it, is that it's very customizable. Employers, again, no matter whether you're a 5, 10, 25 person business or you're a Fortune 100 corporation or a Fortune 1 corporation, for example. In Arkansas, we have everywhere from small, medium business to the largest companies here in the state of Arkansas utilizing apprenticeships in multiple different ways. I didn't mention the transportation logistics area. We have diesel technicians who are doing apprenticeship programs, automotive service technicians who are doing apprenticeship programs, and so there's really no limits to how you can do apprenticeship other than making sure that you have employers that are engaged, you have training providers, and the benefit of it from the state's perspective is we're able to leverage both state and federal funds to help support the expansion of registered apprenticeship to help reduce costs from the related technical instruction, perhaps, if an employer is outsourcing that to a third-party provider, whether that's a post-secondary institution or a for-profit private business. And then, obviously their investment is the wages that they're paying to the apprentices. So it's something that we fully support and strongly support. We've seen such significant advancement and expansion of apprenticeship that we're going to continue to support it, along with all the federal funding that's coming down to help support the expansion of apprenticeship as well. Goal number one is obviously to create a skilled and technical workforce for an employer. And there's a lot of data statistics that go to support, the return on investment that employers have when leveraging registered apprenticeship. Depending on what study you look at, for every dollar invested in registered apprenticeship, there's a $1.40 return on that investment to employers. And so it makes sense not just from a training perspective, but also from a financial perspective. A lot of companies do not have structured training programs in place. And so what an apprenticeship does is it puts that in place. It allows an employer to decide what competencies they want to learn through work processes, is what the U.S. Department of Labor calls them, through your standards of apprenticeship, which is the skills and knowledge and abilities that you have to obtain throughout your duration of an apprenticeship, whether it's a 1-year, 4-year, 6-year apprenticeship. The most I've seen is 6 years. The least I've seen is 1 year. At a minimum, it has to be a year. It allows the company to know that if someone goes through and gets these competencies, they're going to have a wage increase throughout that process. So at a minimum, there has to be one wage increase during the duration of an apprenticeship program within the first year. And there also has to be a progressive wage scale. So it not only helps benefit the employer from understanding these are what my apprentices are going to be learning, here's the skills they're going to be earning and the badges and the credentials and certifications or what have you, but it also allows the apprentice to know, if I go through this structured training program, this curriculum, this on-the-job training under the tutelage of a mentor, I know that I'm going to increase from $15 an hour to $17 an hour to $21 to $24 and so forth and so on as I earn those additional competency, skills, knowledge, and abilities. And so it not only benefits the apprentice, but it also benefits the employer by structuring that program, allowing there to be an understanding both on the employer and the apprentice side as to what my pay increase is going to look like. Because one of the things you see a lot of times is individuals will leave a company for 25 cents more, 50 cents more, or $2 more per hour, and you can't fault them for it, but a lot of that's because they don't have the knowledge of understanding when is my next promotion, so to speak, when will my next pay raise occur. Apprenticeship helps solve that for the employers and the apprentices. At a minimum, there's a registered apprenticeship information data system. It's called RAPIDS. And typically, most states leverage the registered apprenticeship information data system, AKA RAPIDS. I'm not going to say that ongoing. But by leveraging RAPIDS, you have to input all the information from apprentices as a program sponsor, right? So the way it works is an organization or an employer, a post-secondary institution, whomever, can register an apprenticeship program with the Department of Labor. And actually, there's two ways to do this. You can do it as an Office of Apprenticeship State, where the U.S. Department of Labor approves the standards and the work processes for an organization or an employer, or you can do it through a state apprenticeship agency. So there's two different models in which it can be done, which the state apprenticeship agency is essentially the registration agency that does that work within their state on behalf of the U.S. Department of Labor. Once you have gone through, and again, whether you're a single employer or whether you're a post-secondary institution who's registering a program on behalf of a group of employers, taking on that administrative burden and function, you register that program, and then you have to input all that information into RAPIDS. That is inclusive of the RAPIDS number that is a unique identifier for every single apprentice, name, date of birth, social security number, all that information. And so you have to have that information in there along with their what's called a 671 agreement, which is essentially the apprentice agreement. You have to have an employer agreement on file, and you have to maintain those records and update them as apprentices are completing and going through and getting their hours towards the OJT as well as the RTI components, so that DOL and yourselves as a state or an organization can track the progress of your apprentices. And so while we do not necessarily have to report out as a state right now on that type of information, it is reported within that registered apprenticeship information data system, which DOL obviously has access to. And so we can go in there and pull reports to find out how many active apprentices we have, how many active registered programs we have, how many completers we have, which we then relay that information to our Department of Labor and Licensing here in the state of Arkansas. For electricians and plumbers, for example, electricians have to be licensed through the Department of Labor and Licensing. So when an individual completes their apprenticeship program, and that's completed in RAPIDS as well as in our own apprenticeship portal that we've developed with the Division of Information Systems, we translate that information and release them to test over to either the Department of Labor and Licensing for electricians or the Department of Health for plumbers. And so those are some things that we report on. Now, if you have federal discretionary grants like we do currently, there's about 96 data elements that you have to report on for an individual that goes through that you are awarding funding per se to that individual. So, that's everything from date of birth, race, ethnicity, education requirements, so forth and so on. I mean, for example, there's this one grant, right? And you have to report out 96 data elements on every single apprentice that you have. And so that's done quarterly through a report that's got an acronym called WIPS. And so, obviously we have people on our staff, and there's other organizations around the state who provide that report to DOL for monitoring and compliance and things of that nature. And then DOL obviously will come in to your program if you're the sponsor of that program and do a monitoring and compliance visit to make sure that have your wage progression scales on file, make sure you are updating your hours, make sure you are inputting your information for your apprentices. That way that they know that you are operating that program efficiently and effectively under the rules. And we do that as well because we fund, from the state of Arkansas's perspective, we fund apprenticeship programs at $2.4 million on an annual basis. And so when we fund a program, we go in and we make sure you're teaching the number of hours you say you're teaching. You have your agreements and your forms and your documentation on file, and that your invoices and everything else match up to the funding that you've requested. And so we do that on an annual basis. We audit and do compliance reviews with all of our programs annually. Number one, I mean, you hear it anecdotally, but you hear it all the time too, which is I was able to get a skill set. I didn't have to incur huge amounts of debt to do it. And I'm making more money than I did if I would have gone to college in some cases, right? And it's an alternative pathway for me. College wasn't for me. I wasn't good at school, right? And so I was always good with my hands. I loved working on machinery, or I loved doing X, Y, or Z. And so a lot of times you'll hear apprentices say, yeah, I just bought my first truck. I'm 22 years old. I just bought my house. I own my own truck, and I'm buying a bass boat because I did not incur the debt that was associated with going to a four-year institution, so to speak. A lot of times employers will cover that expense on behalf of the apprentice, so they don't even have to pay their own tuition, or we have state and federal assistance to help cover the tuition expense for an apprentice. But I think the biggest, indicator that it's working, yeah, we can look at the apprentice, but I think you have to look at the employer as well, right? Because, when we started doing apprenticeships in the IT sector, we had one or two employers who were doing a registered apprenticeship. Today, we have over 75 employers who are active in registered apprenticeship. We went from, roughly about 12 to 25 apprentices in the IT space. We're on track to graduate more than 400 apprentices this year just in the IT space. And so alternative pathways for individuals who may not go to a 2 or 4 year degree, but maybe they have some college level experience, whether it's in IT or manufacturing, what have you, they can go and get a job direct out of high school while they're in school, recently graduated, and realize that I can make money, I can learn on the job, and I don't have to go get a certificate or a degree to learn it. I need to be involved in an apprenticeship program, which again provides that opportunity not only for the apprentice, but for the employer. And so when we see, companies in Arkansas, when we first started in the manufacturing space, right, we had 2 or 3 companies who were doing it. 15, 20, 30 companies later, we're still growing. In Northwest Arkansas, we started with 15 apprentices in an industrial maintenance program with one company. We now have 5 companies and over 75 apprentices through one organization. And so that to us speaks volumes from the employer side as well as the apprentice side. I mean, when you look at where apprenticeship was just a few years ago, I mean, that 3,500 to 7,500 apprentices, a lot of that's in the construction space. So let's not, the economics and the growth in the construction space is 85% of the apprentices we have in Arkansas, and it's 85% of the apprentices probably nationwide. But when you see that other 15% grow from 12 to 400, from 10 to 50 or 75, from 0 in our registered nursing apprenticeship program to 65 or 70 now, from 1 hospital to now 4 hospitals, and we're just getting started. I fully believe, like in the registered nursing apprenticeship program, like I said, we started with 1 with about 15 apprentices. We moved to 2 to 30, 3 companies, 40. Now we're about to launch our 4th company out of Russellville who's going to join. But I think we'll soon be at 10, 15 different companies, hospitals who are operating graduate registered apprenticeship nursing programs, and we'll be well over 100 apprentices active at any given time. We have a student who's attending, Little Rock Central or Greenbrier High School, right, or Maumelle Charter High School, and we know that we have some general information about that student, right? But did they attend a pre-apprenticeship program, right, which is a work-based learning experience? It's unpaid, right, but it's in partnership with an employer, with a program sponsor, and at the end of that day, if that student or that individual, that pre-apprentice wants to move on to a registered apprenticeship program, hours will count towards that. Did that individual who took that CTE program, right, who was involved in a pre-apprenticeship program, go to work in a field that was aligned with that? Sometimes we lack the data that shows where, Mia or Ava, for example, or Johnny went to work after they did that work-based learning experience, or were in that manufacturing, industrial maintenance, welding, career and technical education program at their local high school or their secondary career center. We can track them sometimes if they move from, a lot of our secondary career centers are on a post-secondary institution. And so if they go from UA Cossatot, where they're a high school student taking that course, and then they matriculate into the post-secondary course, we're obviously able to track that. But what happens after that individual leaves that program of study? Did they go to work as a welder? Did they go to work as a diesel technician? Did they go to work as a fiber optic technician? And so I think for us, what wages were they hired into? Did they get hired into a wage that was above and beyond what they would have if they hired somebody that hadn't been through that pre-apprentice training program, that work-based learning experience, or other avenues? I think for us, that's something that we have to identify, because we're obviously heavily investing in pre-apprenticeship now because we have this network of registered apprenticeship programs around the state. But one of our big questions is, to employers, are you willing to hire these individuals at a rate that's above and beyond what you would somebody off the street, so that it provides additional value to us certifying these pre-apprenticeship programs as state certified programs, right? Does it show value to our career and technical education programs that if your student comes out with an AWS welding certification and maybe perhaps has done some work-based learning experience external at an employer, then would you hire that individual versus somebody that came to you with little skills or perhaps an AWS certification, but didn't have the work-based learning experience to go along with it? And so I think for us, obviously, along with the demographic data, we're always very keen on wages and what wages look like, what that growth in wages looks like over sometimes, DOL specifically, we'll look at a 3, 6, 9 months, 12 months post-completion of a program. We're always looking at, where did the student go after they finished the career and technical education program or the pre-apprenticeship effort, right? Did they go on and matriculate into a registered apprenticeship program or direct to employment with a company who was a part of that? And so for us, better data to be able to track that, which is why we developed our Arkansas Apprenticeship Portal in partnership with the Division of Information Systems, was so that we had our own database to be able to track that information from a student or an adult learner, for example, right, who may have recently gotten their GED, to say they enrolled in a pre-apprenticeship program through the Innovation Hub for welding or construction or IT. They took those courses and then they moved on and got employed, right, with First Orion here in Little Rock, making $24 an hour to start off as an apprentice. And by the end of that apprenticeship, 2 years, 1 year later, they're making $35 an hour and they're 23 years old. And just, a year and a half ago, they were enrolled in a GED program, changing their life and putting themselves on a path to really launch their career. And so for us, it's those elements that are important. We have CRMs that we use on the front end when we're working with companies and move through stages of cycles of completions and are able to report back on how much did we fund and what were the outcomes and things of that nature. For us, though, when it comes to whether it's registered apprenticeship or other investments that we make in work-based learning, being able to have a dashboard of sorts, though, where we can receive that information that says, over the course of the last year or the last 6 months, we put 250 individuals through a pre-apprenticeship program. We put 250 people through a work-based learning experience at a CTE program in partnership with an employer, right? And so of that, what was the outcome there? And how do we track that from a 6-month period to a 12-month period to understand whether or not they were employed after that experience, whether or not they continued their education, or did they, do something else, right? Because I think that's just as important as anything else, which is to understand what percentage of our participants who are actively engaged in these programs are actually following through with it, or are they moving on to something else? It doesn't mean that it's not of benefit to them. They may have want those skill sets for reasons later in life or just to be a well-rounded individual. But for us, if we have a dashboard of sorts that can really easily, clearly identify the return on that investment, the earning potential of individuals who participate in it compared to that of individuals who didn't, and be able to have that in a simple, either a one-page executive summary or in a dashboard that is that is intuitive enough for us to be able to go in and also be able to place on our website. For us to be able to have, we have a lot of businesses, organizations, associations, nonprofits that we work with around the state, and being able to have that as a resource to them on our website, on our homepage, actively updated, whether that's nightly, weekly, monthly, quarterly, I think is obviously of great value. And, for us and the world that we live in, data is changing every single day, every single moment, every single second. And so the most frequent that we can have updates and real-time information it becomes more value to us, obviously, and more value to our end users.